And that's what John has said all along. Let the energy do the work, but your heart, your intention has to be to help, not to fix.
Yeah.
Your intention has to be in all of this an adventure, a curious cat, not how can I fix this? How can I change this? You're not trying to change fascia. You're trying to facilitate fascia changing itself, because fascia will always work to be the most efficient and effective it can in any one moment.
Thank you for joining the Essential Therapies podcast. This is Dr. Cindy Hodgson. I'm a physical therapist and exercise physiologist, and I am so excited to have Carol Davis here, Dr. Carol Davis. She's a physical therapist and a longtime practitioner of the John Barnes Myofascial Release Approach, and no stranger now to this podcast, because Carol, I think I had you here 3 times. There's three podcasts out now with you. So we just finished the British Fascia Symposium last weekend, and then we just both listened to a follow-up to that this morning, and there's a lot of excitement going on between us about this whole biotensegrity news and how it's coming out, and just all of the new things. And Carol, I just want to have you take it away as I ask the question, how does it feel now after being a practitioner of Barnes work for, I believe, over 30 years, and what John intuited so many years, decades ago, and brought to the medical community, and was shunned and, even laughed at times and misunderstood, let's just leave it that way, and well before his time, bringing this information to practitioners, and just decided to, I remember John saying this, I'm just going to teach people who want to learn this work so we can help people and not get hung up on the science world. But yet here's the science world coming in. And tell me, how does it feel for you to finally be sitting here today after the 2024 British Fascia Symposium, where we're talking about energy and emotion and the importance of all of this that I have been hearing John say since I started doing this work 28 years ago, and you from back on that rock in Sedona down at the brook talking to John. Yeah. So please take it away.
Well, it feels delightful. That's the one thing that I took away from the BFS. Finally, more people are talking like this than are not. And it used to be that it was very, very lonely. I was the only one really talking about light, sustained touch. And I certainly was the only one talking about energy and energy flow between human and between the therapist and the patient and back. And I remember in the 90s, John and I used to trade articles and books. He would send me books. And I would send him articles, and we would say, I wonder when this is going to come mainstream. When, and we did talk about the concept, Rupert Sheldrake's concept of the 100th monkey. After a certain time, a certain amount of people start at first, as John teaches, at first, that's hogwash. I don't believe that at all. And then after a while, people say, well, maybe. And then after a while of that, they say, I believe that all along. And we're getting to that place of, I believe that all along, although we're not there yet. When I was younger, I had a lot of zeal because I saw the benefit it was bringing patients. And like John, I was discouraged with what was going on in the medical community for all kinds of reasons, for quality of care. But I also was discouraged with my colleagues in physical therapy, that they wouldn't be more curious about this, that they wouldn't be more open. And it's not physical therapy that's leading the way here. Certainly Neil Thies is a pathologist, a physician pathologist, who spoke about the spaces in the interstitium around organs where they used to think it was artifact under microscope. Now they hypothesize that these spaces, which are kind of like little holes, are actually the pathways for the information flow that John's been talking about, flows through fascia, through the crystalline matrix, the liquid crystalline matrix of the extracellular matrix of the fascial web. They found an anatomical substrate that correlates with what that could be. We used to think it was the collagen fibers, the polygons of in strolling under the skin. And I got into a long conversation with Graham Scarr about that. He said, no, and Jean-Claude told me, no, Carol, those aren't hollow tubules. They're simply collagen structures, polygons that are forming like bubbles, that are forming boundaries around this viscous fluid. And I said, well, where are the tubules? And because I was thinking about the tubules in the cytoplasm and also the tubules in the extracellular matrix. And it wasn't those polygons. And then Neil comes forward with his talk about that this seems to be what's happening, that there are these channels within the interstitium, that soft, filmy, web-like fascia that surrounds every one of our organs. You know, our organs come into the fascia and are bound in the fascia and work with the fascia to function. They can't function without fascia. And so this is a communication system between the extracellular matrix fascia around the organ, whether it's the heart or the lungs or the intestines or the kidney or the bladder or the liver or whatever. They're in conjunction with each other. And now we've got a whole topic of the British Fascia Symposium around the importance of light touch. And I told you I was so discouraged in 2016 at the British Fascia Symposium when I heard over in London, Winchester, I heard a very well-known fascia guru say, excuse me, to get down to the fascia around the periosteum, you've got to press very, very hard. And, you know, it'd been accumulating this concept of might makes right and force, nothing about energy, of course, at all.
Yeah.
And I just got up and left. And I was so discouraged. And I thought, they just don't seem to get it at all. And I got lonely. I get lonely, and I'd email John and I'd text John. And when texting came in finally, we used to have a great conversation about when will the 100th monkey be? And we guessed. I think he guessed 2003. One of us guessed 2003 and one of us guessed 2005, where he would start to sell out on his courses. And now that's just common. Every course that he gives, there's a waiting list practically. Yeah. And so people are really hungry for this material because they watch and see that it works, and they're no longer so worried about what people are going to think about them if they embrace it, except for my leaders in physical therapy. I've only had one state ask me to give a talk about energy and therapeutic presence and fascia and biotensegrity, and it was well received, but I haven't gotten a whole lot of feedback about it. But you know, in time, everybody will be practicing this. We're just part of a process. It's fun to watch it, though, isn't it? I told you I don't have the zeal that I had as a young person. I was adamant. I was adamant that people would wake up and be more curious and not be so stodgily bound to their paradigms of biomechanics and levers and layers and linear processes, and start to wake up to the beautiful, beautiful flow of energy and the beautiful communication that can take place if you're listening carefully, as John teaches, the beautiful communication that takes place between you and your patient through this fascial biotensegrity energetic resonance.
Ah, beautifully said. Thank you. When do you think, or when do you recognize or remember that shift? So you mentioned 2016, so 8 years ago, and then now the topics, and I just will mention a couple of these just so people who aren't aware of this, starting with Neil Thies, the complexity theory, which was amazing, and going from that to this working with the light touch and new anatomy, working with scars, movement as therapy. But through all of these topics, there was this going back to the emotion and the energy, and then this whole idea of the biotensegrity as the concept and the fascia as the mechanism
Substrate.
or the
Yeah, the
substrate,
substrate.
yeah,
Mhm.
that we're getting there. It's just all coming together now. When did you see that shift? As I'm thinking back, like I didn't, just with the way my life was going, I was not going to these back in 2016, right? Then in 2020, it became online, so there was more going on, more people could attend from different areas.
Yeah.
What's your thought on that? Like, when did it start to kind of gel, pun intended, together?
Well, it didn't all at once.
Yeah.
And that's the mystery of it all. You know, it built my understanding built. I thought I understood it, and then I learned something else, and then especially with biotensegrity, it really gelled with strolling under the skin. And
Yeah.
and then to hear Jean-Claude say there's no beginning and there's no end. And I really valued the one-on-one conversations I was able to have with him in Sweden, or no, in Scotland, with John Sharkey's dissection course, and be with him in the dissection lab. And then Jaap van der Wal reinforcing John's idea of fascia and the fascia, the exchange it's a process. We are evolving. We evolve from the moment of conception until the moment we die, and we continue to evolve. We're still this, as Neil points out, this complex system that has all the characteristics of a complex system. It's self-organizing. It's self-regulating. It's able to. It's organizational in its structure. It's not just tissue. It's not just connective tissue. And when I made that leap, then I began to say, oh, this is really, fascia is on a whole different scale than seeing it just is bone fascia. As soon as you ask that question, you know somebody's thinking about fascia as connective tissue. Fascia is so much more. Fascia is really the organizational system of the highest of. In fact, I wrote a definition of that. Organisms in the body have their own unifying function. That's what makes them an organism. Okay, so the cardiopulmonary system is an organism of the body. All right. I say fascia is the primary system, organizational system. And its unifying function is communication. Yeah. The unifying function of fascia at all levels, micro from the nucleus all the way out macro to beyond the energy field, is communication. That's the substrate within which communication takes place, fueled by bioenergy, by biotensegrity energy, and all the other energies. But I say fascia is a living, vibrating crystal matrix system within life forms that unites all other systems functionally. Communication is the key element that elevates the functional importance of fascia. This communication flow of information with all systems by way of fascial vibration, electron vibration, is also known functionally as the mind. It works to facilitate homeostasis and elevates the importance of fascia to great significance, a hierarchy within a hierarchical system of biotensegral energy flowing within and through the architecture of the fascial system. So that's a more complex definition of fascia, but that's how I've grown to understand it, believing it was just the stuff that I was throwing in the bucket.
Yeah.
1968, and now recognizing this system is the system that probably is the foundation of fundamental awareness, the foundation, the substrate of fundamental awareness or consciousness. And it's more than just housing the nervous system. It is a nervous system in and of itself. And it's part of the interoceptive nervous system because its fascia itself is sending signals through the fascial network to the nerve endings up to the brain for interpretation. And so you can't, we used to say the brain was made up of gray matter and white matter. And oh yeah, there were glial cells in there and kind of a substrate that held the cortex together. Now we understand that those glial cells, which are fascia, are also acting like brain cells. They're part of the communication system. So the more we learn about it, the more exciting it becomes. And the more I understand that we are all in process, every millisecond, redefining ourselves and becoming aware, and with this marvelous orchestration of all the sensory motor or components that are communicating within the fascia. But the communication within the fascia is much, much faster. And Jim Oshman had been talking about this in 1999, that there's a communication system within the fascia that's as fast as, if not faster than, the speed of light, much faster than nerves. And that this system is the system that keeps everything going and coordinated. The nervous system is too slow. Yeah. And it's too, as they said in the last session, it's a signal, and then it's a cable, and you've got all these, and we're talking about 35 to 70 trillion cells that have to know what's going on at any one time. That's the job of fascia.
Yeah. Yes, and John's been saying that in courses for so many years, and I can't tell you how many times I've written that down in my notes, even repeating courses, and like, oh yeah, what's that line? What are those numbers? And now talking about the nervous system, and since learning that from him and feeling it. I mean, we feel this under our hands, right? That understanding it really, you start to really notice that the nervous system is secondary compared to this other communication system. And that's what I've been telling my patients.
There's a whole branch of science that says that we are blasphemous in saying this. They're the neurocentrists, and they are really staunchly opposed to us talking about fascia this way. They say we're in a cult, that we have no biological backing to be able to say these things, but they just aren't reading the science that we are. They're reading central nervous system science and autonomic nervous system science. And they're the ones that really benefit a lot from what the autonomic nervous system does, especially from interoception and trauma studies and so forth, and how we can heal. And the framework of the central nervous system and the brain in being able to help us find our way in the world. But that is an organization that is a subset of fascia, and fascia is a part of the brain and a part of the spinal cord and a part of the peripheral nerves, and they can't work without it.
Yeah. And when I explain to patients that everything is dependent upon the fascia and the state of the fascia and how the fascia is doing, and that we're mostly water, and trying to bring it down to a level for the layperson who's not, understanding of the anatomy, it's almost easier for them to understand it, I think, than some of our, medical community when we talk about physical therapy.
They don't have to unlearn stuff.
Right, right. And so I was telling someone the other day, because people seem to understand this idea that we're mostly water. Of course, we know that we're very specialized water, which I would love to hear your little explanation about the H3O, H3O, right? Yeah, from the H2O.
H3O2, yeah.
H3O2, yeah. Anyway, I say, we're mostly water, and I have a pond in my backyard, and I'm often I remind myself this when I don't feel well in my body, like something's tight, or I have an ache or pain or whatever, I might wake up not feeling the best, and when I look at that pond, it's changing all day long. It's constantly changing. So I put in my mind, which is also, of course, a big part of how our fascia responds, right? The idea that, hey, I might feel like this right now. What can I do to change the internal environment, which is mostly water,
Right.
which happens all day long on my pond, for example, so that I can improve how I'm feeling,
Yes,
And then
right, yeah.
it helps. Like I see the light bulbs going, oh yeah, like, okay, yeah, I'm mostly, let's do something to change that water right now and see how we can, make it better,
Right.
and they seem to get that idea, which is
And
helpful.
it starts with an idea. It starts with a thought.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what's most important. And to recognize that the way you feel in any one moment can be changed by the way you're thinking about it.
Yes, and that's the energy piece too, right? And the frequency
Thoughts
piece.
are vibrations.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So why don't you share a little bit about how that word energy has, came up, and it wasn't quite the bad word now at the BFS, like maybe it's been in medicine before. Just using energy and how we are energy.
Yeah, it's still controversial with some people. It
Hmm.
really is foundational to understanding mechanotransduction and the mechanoreceptors. The mechanoreceptors are sensory receptors inside of us that respond to different sensations and send signals in that response up to the brain for interpretation. So we talk about the proprioceptors that tell us where we are in space without using vision, for example. And we talk
Hmm.
about the thermoreceptors and the different sensory receptors, that the muscle spindles and the Golgi tendon organs, and all having to do, the Pacini and the Ruffinis, all having to do with interpreting different sensations, whether it's pressure or elongation or heat or whatever, outside of us, inside of us, to the brain. Donald Ingber in 1996, I think, published, maybe even before that, 89, his first paper on the concept of mechanotransduction. And that is the way he worked it out. He was doing cancer research in Boston. He said that when we press on tissue, electrons flow through the tissue. And so he's already talking about energy flow. That's the definition of energy, movement of mass over space or over a distance. When you press on tissue, electrons flow, and it affects the tissue where you're pressing all the way down to the nucleus of the cells through the tubules and through the integrins, through the cell membrane of cell, into the cytoplasm and the tubules in the cytoplasm, through the nuclear membrane down to the DNA. And he was looking at what impact this has on cancer and on neoplasm development. So then, as a way of making sense of this, he said, we live in an environment of pre-stress. That we know that when you take an incision in the skin will fold over. We are pre-stressed. But he didn't talk too much about the compression that was balancing it. But as soon as he started to talk about a tensegrity model. This is Donald Ingber in the late 80s, early 90s. He gave a tensegrity model where you have intermittent compression with constant tension being the framework that gives us structure, all cell structure. Steve Levin came along and realized that this tensegrity model was an example of something that better explained how we are put together than the biomechanic robot kind of pivots and levers, and that was Newtonian, and that was hard matter physics. This is soft matter, all soft matter. So when we talked about, then we start putting together soft matter with this energy flow. We say, well, what happens to soft matter when you press on it? Well, it changes consistency. It becomes less stiff. And so then we began to say, well, there's a flow of energy by what we call piezoelectricity, pressure electricity, where potential energy is made kinetic through this pressure. And then the effect on the extracellular matrix of the fascia is that the fascia changes consistency The matrix changes consistency from stiff to more fluid. Well, that was the beginning of the effect of energy on our system. John translated that is when I pressed down, it felt like butter melting. And then as I took my hands apart and waited there, my hands kept going more apart, more apart, more apart, like taffy stretching. And that's what he put together as the functional interpretation of what Ingber had written about. Now, whether he knew about Ingber or not, I don't know, because we weren't talking about Ingber at that time. We just knew this worked, and we didn't know why. And then along came Jean-Claude and showed the endoscopic view of living fascia and how it moved, and it was gel-like. And then in 2011 or 2012, 2012 maybe, in Vancouver, when Gerald Pollack got up to this podium and started talking about crystalline water, we think of ice, H2O, as changing form based on temperature from liquid to ice or from liquid to steam. But it also changes molecular composition when it comes in our bodies. The very stable H2, 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen, when it comes into our bodies, we think there's a spiraling that goes on in the esophagus and in the alimentary system, that it spirals around, and that H3O, that H2O changes into a flat out crystal, H3O2, very unstable, 3 hydrogens, 2 oxygens, and it splits so that the hydrogen and the oxygen are separated. And so it becomes a battery, and the pluses are over here and the negatives are over here. And inside every cell, there's this negative zone, this easy water zone, and the positives are over here, and that presents a charge, just like a battery. And then that's part of the flow, the crystalline flow. And collagen is crystalline in nature, water is crystalline in nature, and the gel is crystalline in nature. And so we've got a liquid crystal matrix, energetically primed to have a flow of a vibration of molecules. And what kind of molecules flow? Breath, blood, lymph, neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, steroids, white blood cells, all the flows constantly flowing, fueled by this energy that I call biotensegral flow, that comes into us at the moment of conception and is the force behind the DNA saying, okay, first you're going to have 2 cells, and then 4, and then 6, then 8, and then 16, and then they multiply and multiply, and then the DNA is telling the cells where to go, but the biotensegral energy is the force that's causing those changes into forming the embryo and then the child within the womb, or the baby salamander. And you can see this beautifully on YouTube. Look up salamander embryo, and wow. I show it in my presentations. We used to say the DNA prescribed how we developed. The DNA only gives us what's in the library book. We got to take the book off the shelf and read it and follow it. And that taking it off the shelf and reading it and follow it is the metaphor that I use for biotensegral energy that comes in with the sperm and the egg, totally formed from the sperm, totally from the egg. It comes into that new single-celled egg that then becomes a zygote, that then becomes an embryo.
Fascinating. Yeah. So
yeah, and it's complicated, but it's not. It's simple,
right,
but it's complex. And the more I read, the more I gather. And my passion now is to really understand how consciousness fits into this. And especially interoception and consciousness, the ability to feel my awareness of myself, and then to think about that.
Yeah.
We know our animals can feel and be aware. We don't know whether they can think about that, ponder it. They make decisions based on it. They want to go out. They want to go for a walk. They want to treat. But that they don't, as far as we know, they don't think to themselves, now I'm thinking about that. It's
right. Right.
Yeah.
So your talk was on light touch, and I wondered if you would just kind of share briefly a take-home comment for this podcast and in the light touch, and also maybe adding in there the thing that one thing I think isn't quite filtered in. This is all coming forth now, but the length of time. So you're still one of the only people that I'm hearing talk about staying long periods of time. There's a lot of talking about fascia and movement, and of course we affect the fascia with movement. But when we talk about light touch and these restrictions of the collagen that require this longer time, and some of the research, of course, is showing the interleukins, and I know that's a whole probably another talk, but just the importance of this light touch, but then touching on how this length of time is important, which of course is the John Barnes approach, but I don't feel is really talked about a whole lot.
Right. And I think that if you switch in your mind the idea, the old solid state physics, hard matter physics model, that if you want to go deep, you got to press hard. If you get rid of that and substitute, if you want to go deep, you stay longer.
Yeah.
And so it really is coming to where the person pushes back. John says, meet them, and then take the slack out and stay there and get into a channel 3 conversation and stay as long as it takes. And as you stay there, you'll think, well, in the old model, well, I've been here a minute or so, now I'll go on to the next handhold. No, stay there. And you'll find your mind wandering, bring it back. Now what's happening? Where? And you might say to the patient, are you feeling this anywhere in your body besides, or where are you feeling this in your body besides under my hands? And then they'll say, up underneath my shoulder blade, I feel something. I say, well, bring your attention there. See what that has to say to you. And so it's just a matter of getting into a kind of a conversation while you're treating that's just like a conversation with another person. You don't, a very interesting other person, not a person who's boring, because you're discovering, you're being like a curious cat. You're discovering what is the fascia have to say? How is the fascia reorganizing here? And then Stanley's work, Paul Stanley at the University of Arizona Medical School, did the Petri dish studies that showed that they put pressure and elongation on fibroblasts and on fascia tissue, not just the fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are the cells that form fascia. If you put the fascia itself on tension and compression in a Petri dish, and then look to see what happens in the fascia microscopically, what molecules are exhibited. At 1 or 2 minutes, not much happens. At 3 minutes, there's a little bit more of an activity of interleukins, and interleukins are messenger molecules. And they're the molecules, interleukin 8, interleukin 3, interleukin 3A, 3B, interleukin 1A. Those are the messenger molecules that are telling the cells, for example, come here because there's a cut and we've got to get the fibrinogen oriented here. And it's the messenger molecule in the fascia. Those are released along a time frame that's much longer than 30 seconds or a minute. It's more like 3 to 5 minutes. So you're getting a change in communication at the micro level of cells when you're in this conversation. Now, what's really important in the conversation is that you don't, once you start feeling that movement, you don't push harder. There's a kind of a feeling, oh, there it is, I'm going to push harder. No, hold back. Just let the energy do the work. Let the energy do the work. Those of us who do tongue pulls or ear pulls know that if we grab real hard and pull, we'll get tired and we'll want to drop it. No, if you elongate and stay there, you don't have to, you just park yourself there. And fascia energy will do the work. And there's Richard Hardy has this marvelous video on YouTube of thermography, you know, when he has his hands there, his hands are just placed there above and below the knee. And you can see how the color changes and the temperature changes because the energy is doing the work. And that's what John has said all along. Let the energy do the work. But your heart, your intention has to be to help not to fix.
Yeah.
Your intention has to be in all of this an adventure, a curious cat, not how can I fix this? How can I change this? You're not trying to change fascia. You're trying to facilitate fascia changing itself, because fascia will always work to be the most efficient and effective it can in any one moment.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't really change fascia. We put our energy into the system and allow fascia to do with it what it needs to reorganize itself, to then inspire homeostasis and cellular communication once again.
Yeah. Wonderful.
So we don't go deep, we go long.
Mm-hmm.
And the depth will take care of itself.
Yeah. That reminds me of one of the last times I treated with John. There's the skill enhancement seminar, and I was a time I repeated it, and my hands were on the patient, and he said to me, feel beneath your hands, feel deep to your hands. And so I feel like that's kind of what you're describing. Exactly. As we feel deeper and that connection. And I like to say to my patients, fully arrive in your body at the beginning of the treatment, fully be here and connect. And so you mentioned channel 3. So my logo takes that E from essential, flips it, because for me, being in channel 3 is connecting to heart. And you mentioned the heart. It's so real. So we need to go to another thing we're watching here. Yeah. I just want to close it up with this last thought, and I'm sure you would agree, or maybe comment further to this, as I was just jotting some things down in our previous session, was that, you mentioned physical therapy being kind of resistant to some of these thoughts. And it occurred to me that current therapy models are focused on this old biomechanical way of thinking and needs updated. And so this whole concept, and we talked about this a little bit in our talk on biotensegrity a while back, the concept of biotensegrity and this balance of hidden forces is really what's missing in the education system of how therapists learn to treat, right? And that if we can, I'm not sure the right way to get this information out there, but it reminds me of a friend of mine who writes anatomy books, and years ago, had to be over 20 years ago, I said, we got to add this system. We got all these body systems, but nobody's talking about the fascial system, and back then she said, well, I get it, but if I were to do that in my anatomy textbook, she writes medical anatomy text, nobody would buy my book. That was back then. So what I would like to see and visualize is in the future that's the book you're going to want, is the book that has that in it, right? Is all these different ways of thinking. So yeah, it will come. Yeah. Thank you so much, Carol, for squeezing this in here today. I'm sure we'll be talking again. Yes, it was just great to hear all of your thoughts and summing this up. So have a great time at the next session, and hopefully we will talk to you again soon. I love celebrating it all with you. Thank you. Yes, me too. Thanks, Carol. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.